Over the years, I have been blessed to learn from a number of mentors, both inside and also beyond the church. This morning, I want to focus on one of those mentors, the Reverend Dr. Robert W. Bowl. Pastor Bob had a number of different titles over the course of his career, the most frequent of which was senior pastor of a local church, including of a local church just about 20 miles down the road called First Presbyterian Church in Fort Worth. He also served as moderator of his denomination's General Assembly, chair of the board of the Presbyterian Publishing Corporation, and chair of the board of trustees at Princeton Theological Seminary. Now, I got to know Pastor Bob when he came out of retirement to serve as the interim senior pastor in Naples, Florida at the First Presbyterian Church, a role which happened to make him my boss. Before I met him, a number of years before that, Pastor Bob had written an article, and it's one that I still see circulating and making the rounds today. The article is titled "The S Word," and its subtitle is key. Stewardship is a spiritual matter, not a code word for raising money. Pastor Bob writes these words: "Giving has always been a mark of Christian commitment and discipleship. The ways in which a believer uses God's gift of material goods, personal abilities, and time should reflect a faithful response to God's self-giving in Jesus Christ, and Christ's call to minister to and share with others in the world." He goes on to write, "Those who follow the discipline of Christian stewardship will find themselves called to live lives of simplicity, generosity, honesty, hospitality, compassion, receptivity, and concern for the earth and for God's creatures. Christian life is an offering of one's self to God." Let me read that last line again. Christian life is an offering of one's self to God. Now, Pastor Bob didn't merely write those words as expert advice to others. Instead, he lived them. For him, stewardship as a spiritual matter was not how he acted, but rather it defined who he was and is. And because of him, this increasingly became the perspective that I also adopted. Our reading this morning from the New Testament comes from Paul's second letter to the church at Corinth. And in this passage, he's focused on a rather practical matter, but he approaches it from a spiritual perspective. Paul is in stewardship campaign mode. He's organized a collection among the Gentile churches to support the impoverished believers in Jerusalem. And now he's following up with the Corinthians, reminding them of what he had already asked for back in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Paul wants this local church to come through, to raise funds just as he had previously asked. And so he sends this note as part of a stewardship reminder, inviting them to think of their giving as giving to the glory of God. Did you notice the ways in which Paul described their gifts? He says that the gifts are for the Lord's people, a way that they could support the wider church. He says they are promised in advance. You could think of that as a first century version of a pledge card. They're voluntary. No one is forced or required to give. They are cheerfully given. Folks are happy to share from what they have. And they are generous. This generous giving is a direct response to people's experience of a generous God. Now, focusing on what people are asked to give is only half or part of the equation. Did you also happen to notice how Paul described how God gives? God is the one who provides every gift and blessing, entrusting God's people to use them to bless others. God gives seed to the sower and bread for food. God gives exactly what God's people need when they need it most. And God gives grace. God gives the gift that God alone is able to give. It's true, Paul was fundraising, but it's also true that this was a lot more than that. Paul has identified a real need and is calling people of faith to act on their faith. He wants people to step up and for each person to do their part. Today, I'm in a similar situation. I'm following up on what I and others have been inviting you to consider, not in the first letter to the Corinthians, but rather in our initial communications to all Adventers over a month ago. I'm excited to serve a church that's actually serious about growing for the future. In a day and age when many congregations only look back, Advent has been intentional about not trying to recreate what once was, but instead trying to live well and wisely in the present moment while preparing for all that is yet ahead. And so for several weeks, we've been pondering what it means for Advent to grow for the future and what God is inviting each of us to do to contribute. We've heard temple talks from Bill and Kevin. We've watched a video temple talk. We've received and read a variety of printed and emailed materials. And hopefully you've had some conversations, maybe between you yourself, maybe between you and God, hopefully between you and God. If you're married, perhaps between you and your partner. And now, as your interim pastor, it is my pleasure to also think about the work that I have been doing in your midst, to recognize that my work as your interim pastor is about preparing the soil and perhaps helping you to plant a few seeds along the way. I do trust that Advent has a bright future and one that can only happen when we all come together and each person continues to do their part to water, to weed, and to welcome the new growth that is now just beneath the surface. As your interim pastor, you know that I don't belong here permanently. I'm a member of my home church, the Cathedral of Hope United Church of Christ. That's where I was before I joined you, and that's where I'll return to when my time here is complete. And since Hope is the congregation where I am a member, it's also where I pledge my tithes and offerings. Each year, my wife and I commit anew. We offer our support of that congregation's ministry in multiple ways, including by making a financial pledge. And as an interim pastor, I've had the privilege of serving not only here, but other congregations over the years. And during those times of service, I've continued to support my home church. And because I'm deeply committed to the congregations, including Advent, that I'm with for a short time, I give gifts over and above my ongoing support of my home church to my interim congregations. More specifically, I have always supported unexpected needs. We all know those happen in the life of a church, and special projects that are not funded in the operating budget. But this morning, I've decided it's time to end that habit. I'm not ending my ongoing support of my home church, and I'm not encouraging you to do that either. Instead, I'm committing to both increase and redirect the giving that I do here at Advent. And so for however much longer I serve as your interim pastor, 100% of our financial giving will go to the regular annual budget. Additionally, this morning I'm standing before you, a few of you noticed, wearing one of my favorite stoles, and it has on it, yes it is, what you think it is, it's a big red comma. It's a symbol that reminds me, and is intended to remind all of us, to never place a period where God has placed a comma, because we trust that God is still speaking. We trust that God is not finished with any of us, nor is God finished with this congregation. God is still speaking through you and through me. God is still speaking through Advent. And importantly today, God is still speaking through our shared stewardship in this campaign. I want you to know that this year's theme, Growing for the Future, was not selected by me, but rather by our stewardship and finance team. They know a lot about our annual operating budget, which we often call a spending plan. And they also understand that this is a spiritual document. So together, we are inviting you today to become authors by making your commitment today. Now, as we learned in the children's time, we are not all called to do the same thing. But importantly, we are all called to do something, to plant something, to grow something, and today also to pledge something. May we all give voluntarily, cheerfully, and generously to our beloved congregation, trusting that our still speaking God will take what we offer and transform it into the ministry that our community and indeed our world so deeply need. May it be so. Amen.